I never expected my grandson to have a condition that affects his development. It felt like he was a broken toy, useless and not good enough for our family. My father's hurtful words froze the atmosphere during my sister's funeral. She had been raising her son, who has this condition, on her own until she passed away, leaving him behind. My parents were saying hurtful things without thinking. It was like an invisible wall formed around them, pushing people away. I didn't want my sister's son to hear their hurtful words, so I covered his ears with my hands and glared at my parents. But they kept talking, not caring about the situation. They said, "Take care of him yourself. We don't want to deal with him." They even made insensitive comments like, "Being infertile isn't so bad when you have him." I was furious. I had already planned to care for him myself. I couldn't leave him with people who thought so unfairly. My husband and I stood up to my parents, telling them we would raise him with love and cut ties with them. They left with a sneer, not realizing what they would miss out on. Now my name is Julia, and I'm 30 years old. I work from home and live with my kind husband, Nick, who is 1 year older than me. We had wanted children before we got married, but then something unexpected happened. After tests, it was discovered that I have a condition that makes it hard for me to get pregnant. We debated for days whether to pursue treatment, but Nick said, "I'm happy as long as I can live happily with you, even without children. Please don't worry too much." My in-laws also reassured us, saying, "We just want you both to be happy. We will support whatever you decide." Their kind words brought me to tears. Until then, I had felt guilty about not giving Nick and my in-laws grandchildren, but hearing their understanding made me feel less burdened. Despite feeling more at ease, my worries didn't vanish completely. The source of my anxiety was my own parents. They were overly concerned about what others thought and constantly brought up the topic of having children whenever we saw them. Nick and my in-laws understood our situation and supported our decision to live without kids. Even when we explained our choice, my parents would say hurtful things like, "Don't you want to repay us by giving us grandkids?" Or, "What will we say when our neighbors ask why our oldest daughter hasn't had any children yet?" Nick tried to reason with them, but they wouldn't listen. They would often compare me unfavorably to my younger sister, Erika, who was always praised for her intelligence, athleticism, and likable personality. Erika never boasted about her talents and had a great character. We had a good relationship as sisters, but I didn't have much contact with my parents. Despite limited contact, Erika and I stayed in touch. She confided in me that her son, David, who is now 6 years old, has a developmental disorder, which was a key reason for her divorce. "Sis, please keep this a secret from Mom and Dad," she pleaded. Given our parents' concerns about appearances, Erika feared their reaction if they found out about David's condition. Naturally, I agreed to keep David's situation private from our parents and supported Erika in raising him as a single mother. Then one day, I received a call from the police on my smartphone asking if I was Erika's sister. The female officer on the line hesitated, and something felt wrong. Despite not being hot, I was sweating profusely, and my heart raced. After a sharp inhale, the officer informed me that Erika had died in an accident. I was stunned into silence, my mouth hanging open. I managed to relay the news to Nick, who comforted me as we prepared for Erika's funeral in a blur of time. The night before the wake, I struggled to accept that Erika was gone. I kept expecting her to call or visit for dinner. At the funeral, amidst mourning with Erika's friends, I heard a voice in the hall. "Look who decided to show up. Our daughter who let us down. You still haven't managed to have a kid." I couldn't believe my parents would say such hurtful things at their own daughter's funeral. They seemed oblivious to the pain they caused, insulting me while everyone looked on in disbelief. Friends and relatives clearly saw the absurdity of my parents' behavior. It was evident to everyone that my parents were out of place, making such bizarre comments at such a solemn occasion. The combination of being in public and the grief of Erika's absence made me feel like my heart was being torn apart. The hurtful comments from my parents continued, suggesting that not only Julia, but also Erica, was an embarrassment. They expressed disdain for my grandson's developmental disorder, calling him like a broken toy and useless. I was enraged by their insensitive remarks. I covered my nephew's ears to shield him from their hurtful words and confronted my parents. They dismissed us, saying they had no intention of dealing with David and that being childless wasn't so bad when you had him. Fed up, I declared that we would take responsibility for David and cut ties with them. 10 years later, David had grown into a confident 16-year-old, having adjusted well to living with us. He was rapidly catching up in height, nearing my husband Nick's stature. However, one day, Nick shared concerns about a suspicious individual near our home, a person in a deep hooded parka who seemed to be searching for someone. Nick couldn't discern the person's gender or age, but their behavior raised alarms. I became more cautious when going out, heeding Nick's advice to be careful in our surroundings. I didn't encounter the suspicious person in the parka that Nick had mentioned, assuming they had left the area. However, on my way home from shopping, I was startled to find two individuals boldly sitting in front of my house. My first thought was if they were thieves, but that seemed too obvious. Wondering about their intentions, I was about to reach for my phone to call the police when they called out to me. "Julia, is that you? We've been looking for you," they exclaimed. I nearly dropped my phone in surprise, pocketing it as I turned to see my parents without their hoods, revealing their faces. I hadn't heard from them in 10 years and never expected to see them again, especially coming to find me. I looked at them curiously, wondering what they wanted. Instead, they started questioning why I hadn't told them about building a house and accused me of being ungrateful. I was dumbfounded by their accusations. It made sense that they had been ostracized by friends, colleagues, and relatives due to their appalling behavior at Erica's funeral. My father's arrogance had led to rumors at his company, resulting in a demotion to a less significant department, where he had somehow managed to work for 10 years. Their behavior, pointing fingers and showing no remorse, painted them as heartless to everyone, especially at my father's workplace. After working for 10 years, my father recently opted for early retirement and became unemployed. He admitted that he had quickly used up his severance pay and savings. This was no surprise to me. My father had always been prone to wasting money on unnecessary things, even when I lived at home. He had neglected to plan for the future and now came to rely on me when he realized he had no money for living expenses. Faced with my father's illogical arguments, I instinctively sighed. Their refusal to consider finding jobs themselves was selfish in a negative way. They demanded repayment for raising me, even though that's a parent's responsibility. My mother nonsensically accused me of taking out a mortgage for the house, which wasn't true. I explained that the house was made possible thanks to David. He became skilled at coding, developing apps online using his ability to focus. David's interest in machines started at a young age, watching our family computer intently. I let him experiment with simple games, and as his skills grew, he got his own computer. One of his apps became successful, providing us with financial stability. Most of the app's earnings were saved for David's education and living expenses, not just for buying the house. I hope this explanation would help my parents understand our situation and David's important contribution to our family's well-being. As soon as my mother heard about David's coding talent, her attitude drastically changed. She began speaking in a sweet voice with a forced smile, and my father exaggerated his gestures. They claimed they could better nurture David's talent and wanted to take him in. I couldn't believe their sudden shift after their hurtful behavior at Erica's funeral. I questioned them about their previous remarks, but they closed in on me step by step as I retreated, feeling cornered with no one around to help. Just as I was wondering what to do, Nick's cold voice rang out beside me. He stood protectively, putting an arm around my shoulder and firmly telling my parents to leave. His resolute demeanor briefly intimidated them, but they quickly composed themselves and demanded to see David. Nick threatened to call the police if they didn't leave, and reluctantly, my parents departed. However, I couldn't shake the feeling that they wouldn't give up easily. My prediction proved correct. When they reappeared several days later, dressed in the same suspicious parkas, giving me a sense of déjà vu. This time, their arrival was actually convenient because we had planned to meet with them. When they demanded to see David over the intercom, I promptly let them in, feeling somewhat bewildered by their sudden appearance. They entered our home and began inspecting everything without permission, displaying an irritating sense of entitlement. After inviting them to sit down and offering coffee, they finally stopped their invasive inspection and settled at the dining table with us. My parents sat with me, David, and Nick opposite them. It was clear they were here to talk about David. "You know why we're here today, right? It's about David," they declared. Nick and I exchanged stiff expressions, anticipating their demands. They insisted that we should reward them for accepting David, despite our infertility. They claimed that someone with a terrible personality like mine wouldn't have taken him in if they hadn't spoken up. I wanted to retort that the ones with a terrible personality were them, given their previous refusal to care for David. My mother then passionately described how they showered Erica with love since childhood, never getting angry, buying her anything she wanted, and throwing grand parties for her birthdays. While her words resonated, I couldn't forget how unfairly she treated me and the gifts I never received. Erica, troubled by their favoritism, often apologized for their behavior, taking blame for things I hadn't done. The conversation left me conflicted, torn between memories of their biased treatment and their unexpected display of affection towards Erica. It was touching to recall how Erica secretly celebrated my birthdays with thoughtful gifts, showing her kindness despite our parents' unfair treatment. She grew up unaffected by their mindset, becoming a normal and kind person. However, my parents mistook her good upbringing as a result of their parenting and believed they could do the same with David. But when they approached David after so many years, he didn't recognize them. Their appearance had drastically aged due to financial hardships. Understandable why he didn't remember them. Shocked and hurt by being forgotten, my parents were speechless. Nick then handed them an envelope containing documents. They discovered evidence of their gambling debts, revealing Nick's suspicions about their identities from the start. Nick's stern tone conveyed his anger and determination. He made it clear that we couldn't trust them, not just because of their financial instability, but also their character. We had already cut ties with them, owing them nothing. Intimidated by Nick's assertiveness, my parents collapsed from their chairs, but fortunately didn't hurt themselves badly. It was a tense and emotional moment, but Nick's resolve protected our family from their manipulative demands. After their final departure, Nick and I hugged David tightly, feeling relieved. We later learned that my parents had to sell their house to pay off their debts. They reached out to relatives and acquaintances for help, but were turned away due to their infamous behavior at the funeral. Despite their circumstances, we firmly refused to let them stay with us. We reminded them that we had cut ties and weren't obligated to support them further. They left with despair and never returned after we warned them that we would involve the police if they came back. Living without a stable home, they struggled to find jobs due to their age and survived on short-term employment. I once saw a middle-aged couple scanning job listings at the grocery store, but I left before I could determine if they were my parents. Unable to afford their phone bills, they had to cancel their smartphones. As a precaution, I changed my phone number to ensure they couldn't contact us anymore. Now we live in peace without fearing unexpected visits or calls. I continue to work from home, and David is often by my side, developing new apps on his computer. He enthusiastically shares his progress with us, and we eagerly await his next creation. Together with Nick, I am dedicated to nurturing David's talents and supporting him in his endeavors. We look forward to seeing what he will achieve next.